you. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about your background and how you became drawn into the world of the art that you create.
Thanks, William. My background, as Lou said, I got a MFA from North Carolina Central and a BA in graphic design from North Carolina Central University. Sorry. So my background, as a kid, I used to always just break a lot of toys and make things. And my mom and my brother would find machines on the side of the road and they would give me those machines. And I would take those machines apart just to wow my mom. But after a while, they seen that I had a knack for, making. And I pursued going to North Carolina Central University to get a undergraduate degree in graphic design. And while I was there, I learned how to do hand building and throwing on the wheel. And I had a professor that would come, they would allow me to stay at the studio outside of school hours to make art, to work on the wheel and everything. So I made so much ceramics and pottery work that one of the professors came to my house and took photos of all my artwork and all my ceramics and create a portfolio for me and send it upstate New York, which allowed me to get a residency at Alfred University. By that time, I ended up applying to SCAD and getting a master's in sculpture, where I learned more about being able to talk about my work. Because at that point in time, I was not, didn't know how to, talk about the work or express what the work means. So learning the concept. So going to SCAD was one of the things that helped better me learning how to speak about my artwork and what I'm creating to be able to connect with my audience.
Yeah, that's great. That's incredible. So, I can't help but notice that there are so many historical themes all over your work. As a historian, I see all sorts of things from, perhaps mass incarceration to, to the Middle Passage, to Jim Crow. There are all sorts of historical eras that your work is dealing with. And I wonder, could you talk a bit more about, your sort of natural historical impulse and what it is that you're trying to do with your work in terms of engaging with public history?
So my work really deals with capitalism, consumerism, and brainwashing and the ideas of the Black body and how the Black body is being seen today. So what I want to do is trying to change the way somebody like me is being viewed or give another example for kids to look through. So I just drew a blank. So I want to change the way I'm being seen and everybody who looks like me is being seen. My work comes from events that happen with me in my life and also just seeing and reading things. So it can come from, me traveling around the world with one of my best friends and me creating a piece of artwork off of those events, because at the end of the day, my best friend is a white guy. And no matter where me and him go out the world together, we're gonna have two different life experiences. People will come to me and ask me for drugs, and my best friend doesn't get that. So I want to change the way the world views a person that looks like me, and give another example. So a lot of my work is just life events, and as a kid, seeing how I am being predicted or somebody that looks like me is being predicted on television and trying to figure out how can I change those narratives. So it's more about changing the narrative today.
Okay. So you use three symbols often in your work: a pawn, corn, and a horse. Could you talk more about those symbols and how you use them and why those symbols?
So the pawn comes from the game of chess. In the game of chess, you have that pawn there to allure and attract your opponent to make them do what you need them to do. So it doesn't mean anything that pawn, lives or dies because it's there to serve a certain purpose. Today we have these pawns that we put on these pedestals. We give them all these materialistic goods, these things to allure and attract the minds of kids to want to buy these materialistic goods that then are going back to the companies that are giving upon this materialistic goods tenfold. So it doesn't mean anything that this pawn is winning or this pawn is making so much money because he's doing a certain job. He's selling a certain product. as a child, I was like one of those pawns. I would see the way I was a person who looked like me was being predicted on television, and I wanted those materialistic goods. You know, I wanted, you know, to have the same type of clothes that these guys were having, because that's what I seen as a positive black man or whatever on television looked like. So that's why I used to pawn in my artwork. The next image is the ear of corn. Corn is a GMO, genetically modified organism. And what I do with the ear of corn is I take the cob out and I end up putting a slave ship inside of it. And what that does saying is, how is we as people genetically modified organism, how are we being programmed to produce a certain outcome? So that's why I use the pawn in my work. The corn in my work. The horse comes from the ideology behind the Willie Lynch letter about how to make a slave. And in that letter, he gives a breakdown of how to make a slave, how to make the slave loyal to you to the end of time. And he talks about comparing the dark-skinned slaves against the light-skinned slaves, the ones with nappy hair against the ones with curly hair. And you create this kind of hierarchy where these slaves are continuously competing against each other, trying to outshine or outwit each other. And then he goes to comparing the slaves to the horse. He said the same way you break the horse is the same way you break the male slave. So instead of me using slaves or people inside of the artwork, I'm taking the horse on. Back then, if you had a horse with a broken leg, 9 times out of 10, you're gonna put that horse down because that horse is useless and it's not gonna serve a purpose that you needed to serve. It's gonna cost more money to nurse that horse back to health than it is to put it down. So what I do with my horses, I cut the legs off the horse and I put a lot of legs on them, different sizes, lengths, and designs. So that's a metaphor for we're given everything we need to destroy ourselves. So if I was to take the horse down and put it on the ground, there's no 3 to 4 legs that are the same length. It's still going to fall over.
Mm. Okay, let's jump over to Boundless. So if you want to, could you please pull up some images of the sculpture outside the cam in Wilmington and take us through whatever you want to say about the sculpture, how it came to be, the historical significance. But I think we would all love it if you could explain, how this came to be.
Okay, so Boundless is a monument I just created a little over a year and a half ago. And it's outside of Camp Wilmington. It's on the ground, the Battle of Forts Road, the actual grounds that the United States Colored Troop actually marched on. It is a regiment of 13 soldiers marching. And I was contacted by CAM saying that they wanted to create a monument for the troops that marched on those grounds. And they told me it was a little over 1,800 people that marched through Wilmington. So they wanted to honor that. And we went through back and forth with like what different concepts we could create. And I told them that I was more interested in casting the faces of the reenactors or the descendants of the colored troops that marched through Wilmington. So this is like the process of how I did it. They ended up contacting all of the descendants, a lot of descendants. I ended up casting about 18 people and about an 8-hour time, and end up getting getting their faces, and then putting their faces on the statues that ended up creating for these guys that marched to Wilmington. What's interesting about this monument is that it's also going to have a sound element of these guys marching and hearing the cadence that they went through, because they were all on foot, they weren't on horseback or anything. So just listening to what these guys what they were saying or singing was interest to me. They also are, 3 rows of 3, but they're kind of like woven together, creating that brotherhood, creating that vulnerability as well. So they're on the ground, they're not on a pedestal. And you can see like the movement in their feet and their stride. It's a close up. It's a nice shot.
Yeah.
So if you see that there's just a half of the sculpture, the side is creating a silhouette from afar, but also showing the names of all the men who marched through Wilmington. So they're engraved on the silhouette side. I think that's it for Boundless.
That's amazing. Yeah. So I went down and obviously saw the sculpture, and I encountered it. There was a field trip there. I think the kids must have been like 8, 9, 10 years old, and they were all running all over the place, but it seemed like they were really enjoying it. One of the things that really struck me was the actual place. You know, so much of art obviously is located in museums or libraries and things like that, or even, you know, the center of town squares, which we'll talk about in a minute. But so what did it mean to you to locate this monument literally on the exact same grounds where those men once passed through?
I think it meant a lot because, you know, being able to create this monument and have it on the grounds, you know, to say like they actually walked on this earth, you know, made a whole lot of sense to me. And also being able to cast the bust of these descendants and, you know, thinking about the generations to come further along, you know, like those kids who came along. Now, imagine this, you know, 15, 20 years from now, and a grandchild comes through and say, hey, that was my great granddaddy who marched right here. That's his face. And them knowing the history behind that. Like my great great granddaddy was one of the soldiers who marched for our freedoms here. So that meant so much to me. Instead of, you know, it being on a pedestal, there on the ground. You know, it makes it so much vulnerable for the people to be a part of it. So that's one of the main reasons why I felt like this was a very important statue to create. It's not, you know, looking down and towering over everyone. It's eye to eye.
Yeah, that's really interesting. There's two questions I have about that. One is, you know, Wilmington is a place that has done a lot of erasure in terms of Black history, especially with the Wilmington Massacre. There's just not a whole lot there. And, you know, I get students from Wilmington all the time who tell me they were never taught anything about the Wilmington Massacre, you know, which basically was the onset of Jim Crow in North Carolina and, you know, eliminated Black people's right to vote for, you know, 2, 3 generations. And so being that Wilmington has done sort of a poor job with that public history, what did it mean, or, you know, to erect a monument that wasn't just about something that happened with African Americans, but something that was really positive? So you're doing two things, I think, that are different. One, you're injecting Black public history back into the city of Wilmington through this sculpture. But then, you know, as you said, you're doing so with something that's a bit more positive than I think a lot of people are used to when they're reading about African American history in like the 1860s, for example.
Um, that that is key because there is, you know, a history that's not told. You know, so we need to hear these histories. You know, because right now we have these false truths. You know, these false idols. You know, that they want to give you this history that, you know, America is so great, but there's a hidden history that we don't learn much about. You know, we learn all about slavery, you know, and not about the men who gave their lives to help stop slavery. You know, you know, you hear about Harriet Tubman or a few other things, but you don't get the full truth behind African American history. You know, what was our history? What did we go through? So being able to create a monument to start these conversations was key for me. You know, because at the end of the day, this isn't my monument. This is the people's monument. You know, this is something that I did for the public. You know, it's not mine. It's you all's, and it's there to spark these conversations and open up this history that's not told or never seen.
Yeah. So One more question about Boundless. I mentioned that I encountered a field trip, a group of kids that was there. You were obviously once a kid growing up in North Carolina. You have children yourself. What does it do to tell these sorts of stories for the next generation?
I think it gives like a sense of pride, a sense of understanding for the next generation, because I didn't learn much about the, the Battle at Forks Road or anything like that about Wilmington. This is my first time learning about it, when I was approached about it. It gives a sense of honor, for these kids, to see something else besides, seeing our people in chains or something negative, so seeing it in a positive light and allowing them to, start a new narrative.
Yeah. Let's move inside the museum where you have this incredible exhibit that's named Voices of Futures Past. So first of all, I got to ask you about that name. What does the title of the exhibit mean to you? Voices of Futures Past.
Voices of Futures Past, before I even get to the images, comes from an exhibit that I created that was featured in the National Cathedral. And that was the title of the work, the sculpture that I created. And Voices of Futures Past comes from an event that happened to me when I was a kid, where I didn't speak up and tell my mom about what happened to me in school. And it took about, I don't know, close to 30 years for me to be able to tell her what happened to me. And what I did was create a safe space for young Black men to talk about what's going on in their life, how they feel the world views them. And I cast a bust of older African American men and put these voices of these kids, these 12 to 18-year-old kids, inside the bust of the men. So when you walk by your statue, you will hear these kids talking about what they're going through in today's society, how they feel they're being seen. So what we ended up doing was taking that title, Voices of Futures Past, and using it as the title of the exhibit that's being shown at CAM. So I will go to that.
Sure, yeah. Let's see.
Sorry, this is one more image of Boundless. This image here is actually cash crop, which is shown at the museum. Cash crop is about the estimate of 15 million people that were transported from Africa to America. This is my MFA thesis show. It actually was exhibited in 2010 and it's been traveling ever since. So not learning much about the transporting of people from Africa to America made me come up with creating this for my MFA thesis show, given that history. So I ended up making 15 life-size statues. One represents a million, and chained them all to a pallet, which represents today and how we outsource our goods from sweatshops in third world countries. So I wanted to bring it back to a whole and talk about how has the transport of goods mutated today. Sorry, that image is blurry, but if you look at the backs of each of the statues, it's the image of the Brooks slave ship plan, which is the image that depicts how they put the people on the ship. And when I saw that image, it made me think about a sweatshop in a third world country or places that don't have child labor laws, where they're packed inside of these sweatshops, these buildings where they have just enough room to produce as much goods as possible and ship them here to America. So I ended up making these statues, and then I chained them all to that pallet, and that talks about the transport of goods from one place to another. Ended up casting real people and connecting them to each boat, and then I ended up learning how to blacksmith and forge all the chains and chain them all to the pallet. So there's another image of them. So they're made out of cement, steel, and wood. Another work that I worked on while I was, I guess, a little bit after I finished my MFA thesis show, or probably a year later, I continued to add on to cash crop probably every other year. But this is an exhibit that's called Consumption. Well, one box is called Consumption, but as I'm all the boxes together, it's called Gluttony. But this is my shorthand of a slave ship. And what I did was turn my bedroom into a sweatshop where I had to produce as much as I possibly could in 1 month. And I ended up making a little over 220 of these boxes. And every time I put them in a different museum, they'll change size and shape. So Gluttony is all about the transport of goods from one place to another.
Mm.
I love finding material, using anything I can get my hands on. This piece is called Queen Cotton, and the smaller one is called Girl Cotton. It's actually real cotton that I use for this sculpture, and it's also out of plaster and hydrostone. What I want to do is create something where like these hands are daintily pulling something out of thin air, like the same way they were like picking cotton back then.
Mm.
And then we have this piece called In God We Trust. All my work, a lot of my work deals with capitalism and consumerism. And all the wood from off of these wall reliefs are from pallets and skids. So it's all talking about capitalism, consumerism, about goods and products coming in and making money. And here's another image of the coins. This is actually Voices of Futures Past, the sculpture that I created that was shown at the National Cathedral in Washington. They have the audio in them as well. The close up. I think it's important for me to be able to, for this piece, allow these kids to be able to talk about what they're going through, because at the end of the day, they're not going to say anything. Some kids may not speak to their parents to tell them what they're going through. And as a kid, I wasn't, I love my mom and I spoke to her about everything, but the event happened to me where I was pulled out of class from a Black guidance counselor. I went to two private schools, but one of them focused on English and math. And the English and math school, I was pulled outside of the classroom by a Black guidance counselor. Mind you, every school I went to, just about, I was either the oldest African-American student or the only African-American student in the classroom. These classrooms only had at least about 3 to 5 students per class. But the guidance counselor pulled me out and told me that I needed to apologize to a young Caucasian girl because she thinks I either sexually assaulted her or that I touched the girl. I never had a class with the girl or anything. And I was telling the teacher that I never done anything to the girl. I don't have a class with her. I barely talked to the girl. And the lady never listened to me. And I guess she felt like she was doing me a favor by telling me I needed to apologize to her because I could either go to court or my parents could get in a lot of trouble. So after going back and forth with this woman, it never went my way. So at the end of the school day, I went to the young girl and I was like, "Hey, I'm sorry for whatever you said you think I did." And the girl looked at me and laughed and walked away. And all my classmates came to me and were like, "Hey, what happened?" And I told them, they was like, "Man, you never done anything, so why did you apologize?" So I never told my mom about that event. So just thinking about what kids are going through in today's society, about how they feel they're being seen or viewed, or how they feel the world looks at them, made me want to come up with this sculpture. Being able to create that vulnerability of giving a part of myself to this kid and telling them what I'm going through and what I'm being seen, or how I feel I'm being seen, allow them to be able to speak about or get things off of their chest about how they're being viewed. And then putting them in the bust of this older African-American man and wanting or asking, how can I, as an older man, help this kid or the next generation go through what they're going through? How can I help them manage their life? So that's where Voices of Futures Past comes from. Then also, this is currently Flying W, which is at the Nasher currently right now. These are parts of Flying W. And just so you can see a scale of it.
Can you tell us more about Flying W? So this is brand new, right? This
Yep.
just unveiled last week.
It was just unveiled last week. Flying W comes from the same thing what I was telling you about the William Lynch later about how to make a slave.
Yeah.
And it comes from, you know, just thinking about how are we as people being programmed or trying to outdo one another or giving all these things that are push of a button to change our minds or our thoughts. You know, Flying W comes from, you know, some of the things I bought a lot of parts from different people, but I bought the saddle from Flying W from a lady who helps hurt horses, and she was telling me about she was telling me about a person who used to train horses a long time ago, and how he put different holes on horses, or you know, tied the horse's legs up to make them do what they wanted them to do. You know, a horse is a very graceful and beautiful animal, and he put these restraints on these horses to show them, like, hey, I'm the boss of you. You know, whatever I say, you do. So he put what she was telling, that he tied the front legs of the horses up. And when the horse kind of got out of control, he would pull the horse back, pull the legs of the horse back, and it makes the horse fly forward. And it gives this shape called the Flying W. So that's where the title comes from.
Oh, wow.
And this guy would put things on the horses to make them feel at a disadvantage or feel like they can't do anything inferior. And he wanted to do that and have it like ingrained in his horse's mind all the time, so that once he takes everything off, the horses feel like they are at a disadvantage at the whole time, the entire time they're out. And they will also put like these bags over their heads and like waterboard the horse, put water over their faces. So what I wanted to do was, you know, just hearing the Willie Lynch letter and tying all that together, is talking about how has the African American people been put at a disadvantage, you know, their entire lives. So that's where Flying W comes from. If you look at the hands, when I show the image of the hands, they're actually like holding a rope, but the hands are in positions of holding a rifle or a handgun. So it's hitting on a lot of like historical things and a lot of things that are happening today in our lifetime.
We have some questions coming in, and I would encourage people, if they do have questions, to go ahead and please submit those. And I'm going to get to those in just one second. I have a bunch more questions, but I want to ask just one more before we get to the audience Q&A. And something I've been thinking a lot about, you know, the last few years have been eventful as a historian, being in this region, in this country. And one of the things with you, obviously, you are a sculptor, and so many of our conversations in America right now about racial reckoning, about public art and public history, centers on sculptures. So obviously at Chapel Hill, we had Silent Sam. At Duke, there was the statue of Robert E. Lee that was taken out of the cathedral. What does it mean to you, just sort of broadly speaking? You know, this is something that you've dedicated your life to, of course, but now sculpture and public history and public art is in the public, you know, mind and consciousness unlike ever before in my lifetime, certainly. So I wonder, what has it been like these last few years working as a sculptor, as all of these conversations are taking place?
For the most part, I enjoy creating the artwork, you know, and creating these conversations. But to be able to build a monument and, you know, and have one being erected when other ones are being taken down, makes me think about like what would, had I gave the opportunity before everything was taken down, what would the conversations be with the two sculptures that are there? What are these two monuments saying to one another? What does the monument that has been taken down saying? What was it saying? Like, that the South is still alive, or that, some type of supremacy or whatever. So then seeing my monument that's on the grounds and in the faces of everyone, like what is the conversation that these two monuments are having, with the audience or with the viewers? So I'm so happy that I was able to be able to do this and shed a light on, my people or people in general to be able to, be proud of.
I do have just one quick follow up. A lot of the Confederate monuments are obviously located very high up in the air.
Yeah.
And your monument to the Civil War soldiers in Wilmington, as you said, is right there on the ground. As an artist, what's the difference having a monument that's located high up in the air on a pedestal versus one that's more on the ground, like the one that you created?
I think having one up in the air or up on a pedestal is more of like making people look up and be like, oh, look at this God, and all of these people, But, like these men were like on the ground, they were on foot. So to be able to create something on the ground level is being able to captivate my audience in another way so they can touch this thing and be a part of it. So to have them on the ground is a whole different conversation, because they were physically in the fight. They were the first people pushed in, the first people to have to die for this stuff. So on the ground, boots running, marching is what they needed to be at. They didn't need to be up high for me, for my monument that I created, because they were fighting for their freedom.
Hmm. Okay, I'm going to jump to a couple of the questions that we've gotten so far. Okay, I'm going to ask this question from Elizabeth Brown. And she asked, Mr. Hayes, could you please further discuss your process into representing the faces of the soldiers? I assume, given the erasure, marginalization of the Black body in the archive, that there aren't many representations of these soldiers. How did you imbue these sculptural representations with individual humanity that are clearly identifiable as Black men?
So how did I get the guys or what I did was when I was in conversations with Cam, I told him that I needed help finding the descendants of these guys who marched through Wilmington. So they put a call out to find a lot of descendants. We also got a few of the reenactors as well. So that was how I ended up choosing the men, because I felt like if I got these descendants or these reenactors, they want to have the same features that were passed down from generation to generation. So that's why I chose these certain men to be a part of the monument. As far as the process, the men, they sat down for about, each man sat down for about 20 minutes. And I began to do the process of pulling a life casting off of their face. So what it is in that image that you're saying with the man sitting there with the white gauze on his face, basically what I did was lather their face up with Vaseline, and I placed the gauze all over their faces. And what that did was allow me to capture their likeness, even down to like freckles or pimples in their faces.
Sarah Habib asks, in chess, the pawn is also the only chess piece able to transform into whatever other chess piece if they reach the end of the chessboard. Could you talk about more about the pawn and how it relates to the way that you see art? Is it potentially a way to represent Black history to create a better future?
It's more of a way, when I do the pawn, it's more of me talking to kids or people to let them know that you're not a pawn. You don't have to be what the world predicts you to be. So normally when you see me, or during talks like this, I will wear, the pawn and then I'll have a king inside of it. Let them know that there's a king inside of you, or whatever you want to be. You don't have to be what the world says you are, or predicts you to be. You know, 'cause on television, you see, like in hip hop culture, you see all these guys, you know, doing drugs or whatever, selling a certain type of culture. And what I'm trying to tell kids is that you don't have to be what the world says you are, because, you know, I was that kid that's seen these guys and I wanted to be like them. I wanted a certain type of car that they bought, that they would drive in. You know, even down to a point where I tried to buy that kind of car. You know, so it wasn't until a certain point in my life where I decided I didn't want to be that pawn. I did not want to be what the world says I am, or says somebody looks like me. You know, I can go anywhere in the world. I've been to Ibiza. I've been to South Africa. I've been in so many places, and no matter where I go, when they see me, they see African American man, and they come. People approach me and ask me to buy drugs from me because they think that's the only way I got there, or that I play basketball because of my height. But no, there's nothing. I never done any of that stuff. So basically, I want to change the way the world is seeing the African American person.
Another question about Boundless from Lee Sorensen. So Lee makes the point, in Boundless, you chose to represent the Black soldiers in their heroic pre-battle moment. Most Confederate monuments do the same thing, neatly avoiding the horror and suffering of the war. Lee's question is, since the loss among particularly African American soldiers, is there a risk of following the same strategy as Jim Crow monuments, avoiding the real cost of these foot soldiers, essentially by showing them pre-battle as opposed to, you know, during the action or even potentially after?
So as like you always like kind of see African American people like at a moment where they are down or being hurt. You know, I didn't want to show, you know, African American person crawling or whatever, crying. Um, so that that monument was either them walking into the city, you know, parading and saying that, you know, the battle is over, or marching into the fight. So that was a reason why I did not want to have them like in the midst of the war. I wanted them to be like proudful or happy, you know, to be fighting or to have fought. So it's the in between, either them marching into the fight or marching through the parade. You know, when they, you know, when the fight was won, those guys, they had to march at the back of the parade. You know, when the parade was over, they weren't in the front of the parade. You know, even though they were at the front of the fight. So, you know, those are other like smaller conversations that, you know, people don't even know anything about. Like they didn't even get to like experience the parade to its fullest. They were at the end. So.
Hmm. Ruth asks, is there a particular foundry that you work with to cast your metal pieces?
So for that monument, I use Carolina Bronze, which is located in Seagrove, North Carolina.
Okay. And Paul Jascott asks, what do you think that sculpture does that is different than, say, a novel or even a scholarly article or a film? What does sculpture bring to the conversation in terms of race, racism, and social justice?
Uh, what does the sculpture bring outside of a film? I don't know if there's anything that it doesn't bring outside of a film. I mean, at the end of the day, the sculpture I created was there to create a conversation, to unite multiculturals, different multi-generations, to create a conversation. So all works, depending on what the artist or the creator or the company is doing, they're there to create some kind of conversation. You know, artists for everyone. You know, artists there to create this conversation, to ask questions, to make statements. So that's what, you know, sculpture or whatever art there is that's out there. You know, you can look at film as art. You know, like William said, he's a historian, but he writes books. He considered himself to be an artist. that is an art. That's his art. That's the ability that he has, that he's strong with. You know, I'm strong at creating sculpture, and I want to use my work as a way to open these conversations up.
One of the things that I've experienced a lot in recent years, in doing this type of work, is an emotional sort of visceral reaction to art and sculptures. And I certainly had that same type of reaction when I was visiting your work in Wilmington. But the thing about art, or sculpture, I should say, is that I don't always know why. I like with reading a history book, or reading a story, or reading some sort of a testimony or primary source or something like that. I have a pretty good idea as to why something affects me in the way that it does. But there have been moments in the past few years where I see a sculpture and it brings out something in me that's as equally strong as reading a novel or a history book or whatever. But I can't quite grasp it. But it's also something that I've been interested in pursuing, because I think one thing that it does make me think of, and I'm thinking specifically of the Equal Justice Initiative in Montgomery, which we talked about when you and I met. But I wonder what role art has in pursuing some of these things that we're talking about in history all the time. We're talking about healing. We're talking about reconciliation. We as a society are trying to figure out how to deal with all of these things that occurred in our past that we've never really fully reckoned with. And I wonder, is there any unique way you think that your work, or the work of other sculptors, whoever it might be, Wiley's famous Rumors of War statue, for example, or, what do you make of art's role in that, maybe doing something unique that even history couldn't do?
I think because it's physically there, like it's in the round, and it's not like in your head or reading, which makes people like more drawn to it. Like kids can see these things and be more drawn to it right at first sight. And the art, like I said before, the artist is there to ask these questions or make statements, and to be able to pull people in with their artwork. So being able to create something three-dimensionally, and to be able, will empower people to want to go up closer to it and study it more, and figure out what is the conversation, or how does the title bring in this conversation, or how does the title or the work make people want to go and look up these histories, or what this artist is commenting on. So I think there's a lot of power that the artist has. And then there's a lot of power that the artist gives the viewer to have as well.
Yeah. When you're creating art, do you have a particular audience in mind? I mean, it seems like your art is such a powerful collision of the past and the future, and obviously the present. But I mean, like, who are you thinking of for many of your pieces?
I mean, I want to have my artwork to be open to, every culture that's out there. But I mean, being that I'm African American, that I want to have more African American faces in my artwork, because you don't really see a lot of work of African American people, or sculptures of African American people. So I wanted to be able to show my likeness, through the world, and through my eyes. So being able to create artwork, I want to make something that's timeless, So to be able to comment on the past, the present, and the future at the same time is, I guess, one of my strong suits that I love to create. That's the reason why I like to create artwork, because I want to be able to touch the future generations to come, and be able to enlighten them on the past, things that happened to us in the past.
Yeah. I mean, in thinking about that question about audience, and who this is all for, and why sculptures grab me so much. I think one of the things I'm realizing is that with me, I need the person to get the book and then open the book. I need to have a readership, people that read. But with sculpture, it seems like it's so much more universal that it
Yeah,
can just be a passerby.
yeah. I want to be able to connect people who walking by and see the work. Like, I don't want to have a long text on the side of the artwork to allow them to be able to learn what I was trying to say. I want them to be able to come with their everyday experiences, and be able to create this conversation between me and them, about what the artwork is, because at the end of the day, you're gonna have your whole different life experience, and you're gonna come to the artwork with what you've seen in your life. And to be able to create a conversation between me and you is basically what the artwork is about.
Yeah.
And we talk about how I'm trying to change the world, or see what you've seen, to hear what you got to say about your life and your history with your work.
Yeah. Daniel Ellison asked us a similar question, I think, and he asked, "Can you speak to the difference between creating museum pieces and public commissions compared with creating works for sale to individual collectors?"
To create museum pieces, I mean, you never know what's going to be a museum piece. To create something for the public sculptures, normally I go into it thinking like this is not my personal work. This is for my viewer, or for the audience, or for that community that the work is being commissioned for. So what I do is hold a lot of community meetings where I sit down with the community and have conversations with them to understand what they want. And then I go back to the drawing board and I try and sketch out what I want to create, what I'm thinking this community will want. And I will present it to them, and then maybe we will, get rid of a few things or add a few things. And then that way, that's how I create a public art piece, because like I said before, it's not my sculpture, it's not my work, it's the community's work that the work is being commissioned for. Um, for private collections, it's more of a conversation I have with that private person, that private owner, person who's commissioned me to make something. So I will sit with them and we'll talk and we'll see what they like. We'll go through images of work that I've created, or other images that they are interested in, and then I will make something physically for them, just for that person. As far as museum work, I love creating. Like that's what I do. I love to make. I love to wow my audience and create this certain a conversation with people. So you never know what's going to be that exact museum piece. I like to say, if I can't find it, I'll make it. If I can't make it, I'll find it. So I'm always like creating things. So when it's time to present something for a museum or the curator, I have endless amount of images of work, and then the curator will go through and they'll pick what they want to present in their museum.
Okay, we are getting short on time, but I think we might have time to squeeze in two more questions. I'm going to try and be really efficient here. Fred Joyner asks, when you think about your work, what other sculptors do you draw inspiration from? And how do you situate your work within this broader continuum of Black sculptors, but then also American sculptors in general?
So I don't really look at other artists' work. A lot of my work comes from life experiences, and just listening or driving down the road and finding material that's on the side of the road. So I don't really look at a lot of artists.
Okay. And then finally, I think this is a very useful question for young people, especially from Pamela. Do you offer any beginning sculpture classes for Black and/or people of color, ages 18 plus, to use sculpture to become aware of what energy is stored in their body, experienced during the last 4 years of racial unrest regarding Black Lives Matter and critical race theory? I think that means.
Okay, so currently I teach at Duke University, so I teach sculpture and drawing here. So that's the only outlet that I have. Outside of that, my time is super pressed with like other sculpture things I have to do, or my family. I have a family that I have to take care of. So I am always like creating. So, but if people do like approach me, I do give them my time to talk. So, especially like Instagram, or if somebody says, "Hey, can you talk to a certain artist or kid?" I give them my time, and I'll talk to them outside of me working or whatnot. I just spoke to I think a 12-year-old or 10-year-old the other day about being an artist. So
Yeah.
not to be able to be there to help them make stuff, but I can talk to them.
Are there any centers that might offer similar classes, like beginning sculpture classes for younger folks? Anything that you know of nearby?
They might have like Liberty Arts, just downtown Durham, or where you could go in and learn how to do welding or whatnot. I don't know what programs they have there, but I know Liberty Arts. You can also go to the Arts Council and see what kind of programs that are out there. Um, yeah.
Okay. And then final question, and then I'm going to ask you to share any final thoughts that you have. But especially in light of your work in God We Trust, obviously we just had the first what was it, the quarter with
Yeah.
Maya Angelou, the first African American woman to ever appear on a quarter in the United States of America. Um, what does that mean to you, especially in light of the way that you've focused on money and capitalism and who's represented on American currency?
I think that's super big, a big move that's happening, and enlightening people, that there's more than just one person that needs to be on money or currency. So I'm happy and stoked about the fact that there's going to be an African American woman's face on the coin, on the bills. As far as all the other currency that I've made, it's more about talking about capitalism and consumerism and power.
Are you worried that potentially then, people like Maya Angelou could then also be commodified?
At the end of the day, they are being commodified. So, yeah,
Yeah.
she's good. She's being commodified. So yes.
Okay. We are just about out of time. So anything else, any final thoughts or anything else that you want to leave us with?
Um, well, thank you all for coming in and spending time with me and William. If you do have a chance to go by the North Carolina Museum of Art to see the exhibition there, and also here at the Nasher, and also go to Wilmington and see the monument, and also the work that's in the inside. Thank you.
All right. Thank you all so much. I think that's about all the time we have for today, and we appreciate you joining us.